There are films people say they admire, and films people say they understand. This one is often placed in both categories too quickly. It is remembered as heavy, important, resolved. But the experience it offers is far more uneasy than most memories allow. It does not begin with morality. It begins with opportunity, and that difference matters. This is Schindler's List, released in 1993. A historical drama, yes, but also something closer to a slow psychological descent. It does not ask you to watch heroes fight evil. It asks you to watch how easily a man can live beside horror, without seeing himself as part of it. The discomfort comes not from what happens, but from how naturally it happens. The world we enter is already collapsing, but not yet loud about it. Power shifts quietly. Rules change with paperwork and uniforms. The people who benefit from the shift do not need to believe in it. They only need to recognize its usefulness, and one man does, almost immediately. He arrives, not as a savior, but as an observer with sharp instincts. He watches how influence flows, who is listened to, who is ignored, and where money can move freely because morality has stepped aside. He dresses well. He speaks carefully. He does not need to raise his voice. The system, brutal as it is, rewards those who understand it rather than those who resist it. What's unsettling is how competent he is at this. He blends in effortlessly. He understands what is valued and what is disposable. And in this environment, usefulness becomes a kind of camouflage. If you can make yourself necessary, you are allowed to remain human. If you cannot, you are reduced to something else entirely. The film does not rush to show violence. Instead, it lets structure do the damage first. Lists, assignments, relocations, words that sound administrative but behave like weapons. People are moved, counted, sorted, not because of rage, but because of efficiency. And efficiency is harder to argue with than hatred. As his business grows, so does his distance. Not emotional distance, but ethical distance. He is close enough to benefit, far enough to remain clean in his own mind. He hosts gatherings. He negotiates contracts. He watches suffering the way one watches weather. Something unfortunate, but inevitable. Something you adapt to. This detail changes how the threat should be understood. The danger is not only the men who enjoy cruelty. It's the men who don't need to. The ones who profit quietly, who adjust, who tell themselves they are only navigating reality as it is. The film sits with this type of man longer than you expect, and that patience is intentional. Around him, the machinery tightens. Authority becomes younger, harsher, less restrained. Control is no longer just enforced, it's performed. And those subjected to it learn quickly that survival now depends on invisibility, usefulness, or luck. Often, none of the three are enough. The camera does not beg for your reaction. It watches, it waits. It allows moments to pass without explanation, a glance held too long. A rule enforced without reason, a sudden absence where someone once stood. These are not framed as turning points, but they accumulate, pressing against the edges of the story. What happens next exposes something uncomfortable. The man who knows how to work the system begins to realize the system does not notice individuals at all. It notices categories, and categories do not feel pain. This realization does not arrive as guilt. It arrives as irritation, frustration at inefficiency, at waste. This is where most viewers misremember the shift. They expect a moral awakening. What they get instead is a practical one. He sees that people who could be working are being destroyed pointlessly. He sees potential being erased, not because it must be, but because no one cares enough to stop it. The horror is not just cruelty, it's carelessness. His response grows out of calculation before it grows out of conscience. And negotiates, rearranges. He creates a space where rules bend just enough to protect certain lives without challenging the system openly. On the surface, it still looks like business, and that is precisely why it works. The people he surrounds himself with begin to notice something changing, though they can't yet name Italiano. His priorities shift subtly, not toward justice, but toward control of a different kind. Control that preserves instead of And in a world built on domination, that is a radical adjustment, even if it doesn't feel heroic. Fear remains everywhere. Fear of being seen. Fear of being replaced. Fear of becoming irrelevant to the machine that now decides worth. The men in power fear losing authority. The victims fear losing time. And time, in this story, is the only currency that cannot be recovered. The film keeps returning to routine. Daily actions repeated under unbearable conditions. This repetition is deliberate. It shows how quickly the extraordinary becomes normal when survival depends on adaptation. And it shows how easy it is for those in safety to mistake endurance for acceptance. But this is where the story quietly turns again. The man at the center begins to understand that adaptation has limits. That there is a point where blending in becomes indistinguishable from approval. And while he never becomes pure, he becomes something else. Invested. Investment changes behavior. He pays attention now. He notices absences. He reacts to disruptions that once would have barely registered. The list that gives the film its name is not introduced as a symbol. It appears as a tool. And tools, in the right hands, can be repurposed. Still, nothing feels secure. Every protection feels temporary. Every success feels borrowed. The threat is constant, not because danger escalates, but because it never leaves. And the film refuses to offer relief. It asks you to sit with the uncertainty, the waiting, the knowledge that safety here is conditional and fragile. By the time the first half of this story comes to rest, nothing has been resolved. Lives are still balanced on decisions made in offices and corridors. The man who began as a spectator has stepped closer, but not close enough to escape consequence. And the list itself remains what it has always been. A fragile barrier against a world that has decided some people no longer belong in it. The tension does not come from wondering what will happen next. It comes from understanding what is already happening, and realizing how easily it could have continued unnoticed. And that understanding is where this part of the story ends.